This term, we are studying through the book of Romans. Who were here last week? Week 1 kicked off by our former pastor, Ian Rawley, exceptional Bible teacher. And there was a guy that broke out of his office one day, out of their situation, cracked open some champagne, started giving out cigars, and said, "We have cracked it. We found the answer. Woohoo! We finally got our breakthrough." It was a massive celebration, and everyone was like, "Wow, fantastic!" And so one voice said, "Yeah, but what have you solved? What was the problem? What is it you're getting so excited about?" And last week, we saw at the beginning of Romans that Paul was putting out the headline that God's good news has come, that something good has taken place, and we've got the answer. And the answer is found in someone called Jesus Christ, who is become what Paul believed from the scripture, the power of God unto salvation. And it was a great vocal moment of cracking out the champagne, saying, "We have found the good news." But in order for something to be good news, just like Peter and Audrina have had their key for their house finally, and we're all celebrating because it's taken about 1.5 years to get this jolly house. And so it had some bad news, that there was times when it just wasn't happening. And we were like, "Oh, dear God, we're just praying, we're believing." And then on Friday, they got their keys, and they're cracking open their champagne. I don't imagine Peter smoking a cigar, but I'm sure there was some great celebration. But to have good news, there has to be some bad news in order for the news to become good news, right? And so Paul then goes straight into describing immediately what has gone on as part of the bad news. And he says this, he describes that salvation, and he describes what salvation and good news is all about. He goes and says that we've been rescued from, and describes the human condition. And that is what we're going to look at today. The whole metaphor we're taking as we look at the book of Romans is this idea about ascending a hill, a mountain, going on a journey through the book together. And as you read, I would encourage you to take some moments during the week to read through some of the opening chapters. So right now we're in chapter 1, 2, and 3. Next week, ahead of next Sunday, when Ian Gardner is going to be bringing us the good news of the crux of the cross, of what Jesus did at the cross for humanity. Read ahead of that, chapter 3, 4, up to verse 25. Thank you. So you can get ahead of the game, so you're on the page when you come next Sunday. But Paul immediately jumps into what's going on with the human condition, because to understand the good news, we have to embrace the bad news. And it's with some weightedness that I come this morning. Some of my friends have thrown the Bible physically across the room as they've read these bits of passage, because they are so offended and outraged by it. I like preaching the great bits of the Bible, but do you know what? I've just said I've got to engage with the bits that make me feel really uncomfortable as well. Otherwise, we're not doing the Bible service. Do you know what I mean? And so today we're going to look at that. But I don't think it takes a genius to look around the world today, even what we've just been heard being shared by Keith, that the world and society, there is something that has gone badly wrong. In fact, sometimes we think, oh, it's got to be worse today than it ever was. But there's a very interesting quote from Plato. It's been accredited to Plato, who wrote back 2.5 centuries ago, what is happening to 2,500 years ago, what's happening to our young people? They disobey their parents, they ignore the law, they riot in the streets, they are inflamed with wild passions. So what we experience today is nothing new. I've just been reading over the summer the book Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, written in the 13th century. And I'm like, boy, he's speaking to the human soul in that book. And it's as relevant in the 21st century as it was in the 13th century. And I'm like, boy, have we really changed as human beings? I'm needing to hear what was relevant then. It feels as relevant for me today. And Paul here looks into the condition and what's the consequence of our actions, both universally, but also for you and me personally. In our series in Romans, we're using this analogy of climbing this mountain. But on some mountains, you have to first go down into a valley to then be able to go up. And so, guys, this morning, I've got to take you for a couple of minutes into the valley. And I'm sorry if you came for a happy, clappy time, but we're going to have to experience a bit of the valley before we can get excited next Sunday for a bit of the ascent out of the valley, out of the condition of humanity. But we need to hear our situation and we need to hear the diagnosis. And there's always something, a bit of fear and trepidation when we go to the doctors, like, what are we going to hear? But I need to know the truth before I can work out how to get set free, right? And so this is why I want to encourage us. And you may violently disagree with what you hear from what Paul's insight was into the human condition. And that's fine. You can take it away and wrestle with it. And that's what I want us to do, is to wrestle with this, because we might need to. But this is what he says. He opens in Romans 1:18, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness they suppress the truth." Wow, the wrath of God. That makes me feel uncomfortable. I like a loving God. I like a peace-giving God. I like a restorative God. I love the God of creation. But God in his wrath? Wow, what's all that about? Well, first of all, please put out of your mind any picture of God somehow being in heaven, throwing down thunderbolts and lightning on humanity. Please get that out of your mind. Just because I get angry about something my child does doesn't mean that I whip them with a whip, okay? And we need to understand that just because God feels passionate doesn't mean that he's throwing down thunderbolts on people. But nonetheless, please get a picture here that we are talking about God, a God who deeply, deeply cares about what has gone wrong with his perfect world. He's not someone that just goes, oh, well, never mind, tough luck to them. No, he's feeling indignant about the self-centered destruction of humanity. He's broken about what is going on in our world with hatred and bitterness and anger and resentfulness and wars and conflicts and divisions. It breaks his heart, and he's angry because that is not how he originally designed things to be. It's a masterpiece that someone has come on and started spraying over. Would you, if you were an artist, just go, oh, never mind, I'll just whip up another masterpiece? No, you're going to be, no, stop it. Get off my canvas. That's my masterpiece. This is the heart of God. God is angry and heartbroken over a world that is broken because of sin. And interesting that God's judgment isn't just something here talking about the future, it's here present. And we're going to have a think about that this morning. That it's now, and that we all live, sadly, in the consequence of our actions. And I just want to say that if you think God's a vindictive, angry, judging God, how did he come and respond out of that anger? He sent his only son to come and love a world that had rejected him. Wrath doesn't always have to have a hand-spanking response. It can have a loving, building, rescuing response to it. Understand what the passionate wrath of God means. He will judge what's wrong, but he will rescue and rebuild and re-put things right again. And this is the heart of our God. So Paul then goes on to say, and also, I remember when my sons played cult league football, teenagers, we needed an umpire, a referee on that pitch. Because I tell you what, a bunch of 22, 16-year-olds playing a pitch playing football, there were bust-ups, there were beat-ups, there were hacks. And I tell you, if we didn't have a feisty referee to manage the situation, we were going to be in A&E that afternoon. And so what I'm saying is there are so many places of life where we don't mind having a referee, where there are some rules of the way that things should tick, the way that things are wired. Football would not be football if they had not been designed, the rules and Parker's Piece and 18 whenever. But football works because it has rules, it has boundaries, it had guidelines. And no one is in the terraces this afternoon between Arsenal and Newcastle, oh my goodness, going to say, oh, this is outrageous. Why have they got boundaries on the pitch? How restrictive, how horrendous. How can you put boundaries on this game? I mean, 90 minutes, really? Why do we need 90 minutes? I'm a kind of 160-minute kind of player. Why should I abide to those rules? Well, we do because rules create dynamic, and it's okay to yield to a rule. It really is. We do it in many areas of our life. Oh, but my moral life, my inner life, no, I am my own man. And this is the crux of the situation that Paul dared to go into the territory of speaking into something. And he then goes on in Romans 19 and 20. Let's read these verses together. For what can be known about God is plain to them. So he begins to open his case by saying, look, I want you to know that actually there is a resonance of God in everyone. He says, for what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. There is a God, and everyone knows inherently that there is someone greater than themselves. I would suggest you may violently disagree, and that's absolutely fine. That's each of our prerogatives. But Paul was saying there is something perhaps, even in creation, that there had to be some sort of architect. Even my philosopher's son, who wouldn't normally hang out in church, argues in a pub to his mates and to people he meets that surely there has to be some invisible architect behind the world in what we see and what we engage with. And we have a sense of right and wrong. In our own lives, we all have a sense of having an internal moral compass. The whole of humanity does have a conscience. That checking, that thing is, it tells us whether something is quite right or maybe wrong. That little thing that goes in your mind on the pillow at night as you reflect over the conversations over the day, and you're like, I don't feel comfortable the way I showed up to my colleague. I don't think that was right. And we self-reflect, and we have this compass inside of us. But here's the thing. When people begin to refuse this truth about God, we begin to swap it for a lie. And this lie is this. It is the propensity of man to live as if we were God. I do not need God's rules on the boundary of the football pitch. I am my own football creator. I will design my own game. I'm not gonna do that. I am my own boss. I am my own God. I will do what I want to do. And sin is the decision to live away from God rather than towards him. The decision can be blatant, or it can be subtle. And it shows up in all kinds of ways. But there's this temptation to live away from God rather to live towards God. Do you have that? I have that. Oh, if I could just cut the corner on that. If I could just have my own way in that. And we forget and we don't realize to live moment by moment that we do live in light of a God who has made us and has created a perfect rhythm with which things flow. So sin is failure to live under that rule and out of that relationship with God. And we sin when we place ourselves in charge of our own lives. That is the root cause of what Paul felt was going wrong with the world. It's universal, and it's to do with all humanity. And that means me as much as anyone else. And out of this, our behaviors then flow. When we reject God revealed in creation and his revelation to us, something happens and we begin to worship something else. Because Paul then went on to talk about idols, which is really interesting. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. They began to pull away from God. But they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men and birds and animals and creeping things. Here's the thing. As people, we are wired to worship. We are wired to have an ultimate thing in our life. Now, for Paul, he's like, that ultimate should be the living creator God. He is the ultimate. And Tim Keller has written an incredible book, the late Tim Keller, on exactly this subject. I heard him in the Corn Exchange a number of years ago. Had the privilege of hearing him in the flesh. And he spoke to the heart, and I took friends with me that would not be assenting to the faith whatsoever. And they were like, this guy has got something. We had a great chat in the pub afterwards. And he's like, I get it. We try and put ultimate things higher than the ultimateness of God in our lives. And of course, the heart of sin is this rejecting God and worshiping other things in our lives. We are hardwired as people to give ourselves to something. And we don't like to admit it, but we kind of do. We will worship something that will give us meaning, that will give us significance, that will give us intimacy, actually, and that sense of that's the deep inner thing that we need. And we've replaced real gods with these substitutes. We've replaced the creator with the created. So what do idols look like today? It could be our confidence in knowledge and the belief in higher criticism. I can place you down in any argument. I can come through higher than you in any argument. The pursuit of knowledge. It could be prestige. It could be a need for power. It could be the pursuit of success, which consumes us above anything else, and we will do it, whatever it will take. It could be materials. It could be stuff. I need stuff. Images and masks, where Paul Benger a couple of weeks ago talked about the masks we wear. And those become the images of ourselves that create that sense of who we want to be known as and what we want to portray ourselves to be like. It could be sex and relationships. It could be sport. All these things are good things, right? Birds, animals, they're good. But if they become an ultimate thing in our lives, they begin to skew everything. And this is Paul's point. And when we upgrade things to God, they become places like temples in our lives. Our distorted desires have replaced that intimacy and fulfillment, which only I believe, and I've found in my life, that only God can bring. He is ultimate, in my mind, to anything else. But we look to replace that intimacy, that fulfillment of dreams and desires. We exchange that from being God, and we look for it in lovers. We look for it in goals. We look for it in to fulfill us. And what we're looking for is fulfillment. We want those things to fulfill us, and we want those things to free us. But here's the thing, they don't. And that's it. It's a lie. We have been sold a lie that those things will deeply fulfill us. They won't. So when we've rejected our Creator God and the witness in creation that He's given to us, and we turn away, we say, we're not going to bow down to this God. We're going to rule our own lives, our thinking, and it becomes foolish. And we give ourselves over to desires and our own self-determinations. And that is such a picture of the world in which we live. So what does God do? Does He get angry and start bombing us down and whipping us? No, I think it's something much more terrifying. It's this. Therefore, God gave them up in their lusts of their hearts to impurity, so to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. What did God do? He said, do you know what, son, if that's how you want to go, I'll let you leave home. Go. He doesn't do it maliciously. I think he does it like that father in the parable of the lost son. I think he's broken. I think he's looking for the son to return on the horizon. But he said, do you know what? If that's where your heart's desires, I'm not going to compete with your idols. I give you over to what that will look like and what that will mean for you. I find that sobering. But I feel that's the heart of the Father. There are times as a dad when I'm like, there's nothing I can love about the decisions my kids have made sometimes. But I have to let them go because they are free human beings. I cannot control them. But they have to be able to live as they desire. Otherwise, it's not true worship of me. You know, well, they don't worship me. But like, there are certain places where analogies break down. But you get the heart of that. And so God gives them over to their desires. So when we exchange God for idols, and we create idols and higher things and substitutes for God of things in our lives, we become disordered, and it begins to lead to brokenness. It leads to abuse, and it leads to lust. And this is what Paul then goes on to as he speaks into where Rome's at. He goes, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relationships with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves a due penalty for their error. I don't know what those penalties were, but like they were seeing something going on in Rome in the time that was probably pretty extreme, and like Paul wasn't a weirdo. He wasn't wacky. I think he was just picking up something that felt really broken in their culture, but no one dared to really talk about it because of its prevalence, and how they'd made Eros such a god and sex such a god in their city. And I just wonder if our culture has perhaps sometimes not doing it. And I'm not talking about homosexuality. I'm talking about heterosexuality. I think there's an elevation of Eros that almost puts itself in our culture above God. And so I think there's a challenge here. But as it's been written, when we worship idols, we become enslaved by their dark side. If it's a worship of money, and you will live in the fear of never having enough. If we worship body image and beauty, and you will feel ugly and inadequate by comparison. I talk to my kids about going to the gym. They pick which gym they go to by how they are going to look in that gym. My son went to a gym in Warsaw, and they were built. And he was like, "Dad, I felt like a wimp walking into that gym." I said, "Son, that's where you should be then." No. But like we like my body image kind of mattered. I could start comparing myself. Well, I don't. I've given up on that a long time ago. But we worship intellect and being smart. But that can often have another side to it, though we always feel a fraud and on the edge of being found out. Good grief. The years of working with undergraduates, they were at the top of their game in their secondary school. They come here and they realize they are right at the bottom of the stack. How do you deal with that? And it's where we place all that on our measure of where's our ultimate. And in short, apart from the living God, pretty much everything else is going to eat us alive. For Paul, the wrath and the sadness of God is revealed when he gives us over to our own desires and removing his protective responsibility for us and allows disordered desires to run away with us. And that's all of us, folks. It really, really is. And when we don't follow God, our desires become distorted and become broken. Now, Paul here picks up on the matter of sexuality as a case study. But also, he mentions other types of things that I'll touch in just a minute. But here, there is something that makes a point. And this is where a Christian viewpoint would stand on this, that creation affirms that sexual union is good. There's something good. And again, idols all start from something good. We're not silly human beings. We're not going to start following something that isn't actually inherently good, are we? I mean, your Ferrari, it's incredible. Like, you don't take a Skoda and, well, maybe you do. I will not go into that territory. But like, things that we make idols, they are pretty good. And otherwise they wouldn't be substitutes to God. And so, but creation affirms that sexual union is good, and God created sex and sexuality, but God created humanity in his image, and he made that beautifully, male and female, to come together as an image. And we've often made marriage such an idol in of itself, but we've forgotten that actually it's an image of a much deeper relationship of intimacy between God and humanity. And it's a whole picture of the image of God. And it established God's pattern. The Bible says sexual union and procreation. All other sexual acts are not according to God's original will and pattern. The Bible teaches that sex is God's gift to be enjoyed exclusively between a man and a woman in an exclusive, monogamous, lifelong, covenantal relationship. And 30 years married. But do you know what? Even that, God's desiring and depth of intimacy with you and me at a whole nother level. And I think we've been pursuing things in places that actually we've been trying to find it, but we ultimately, that is found even in God himself. And in Rome, it was so obvious that man's desire for sex had become distorted, had become a god in and of itself. And what God had meant as a picture of intimacy of union between us and God, as an even greater intimacy, it had been made an idol. And in Rome, it had become horrific records of when there are no limits and things are let off. And Paul is speaking into that brokenness in what he says. But the whole thing is that the thrust of this is that no one is off the hook, because Paul in this letter is trying to unite Gentiles and Jews. And the Jews were like, fine, That's not us. We are the people of God. We're in God's good circle. That's the pagan Gentiles. That's the Romans. They are pagans. And of course they're under the wrath of God. But you need to keep reading, because Paul goes, you Jews are also under the wrath of God, because you have become so self-judgmental. You have put self and your own rules above God. In chapters, and he goes on to then challenge the religious in this as well, because they have turned it, and I think it speaks also into a scary moment of our day of almost Christian nationalism that we're seeing at the moment, that is almost like damning other people, and it's like we will try and sort of establish and hate other people. But you see, I love this quote from Tom Holland. Who likes Tom Holland from The Rest is History? Any of you do that podcast? No, if you don't, it's amazing. Well, anyway, Tom Holland says this. He says, original sin is the most democratic of theological doctrines. None of us can attain perfection, and so all of us should show humility in our dealings with others. And that is what this should be drawing us to, that we are in need of a Savior, that all of us have fallen short. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so just thinking about this is Paul speaking into the condition of humanity. And I want to wrap up on this, because a friend of mine was on BBC Radio and at Easter, and they was like, "Why? Explain to us, why did Jesus die?" And then the interviewer said, "Because it was to do with God's love, wasn't it?" And my friend Paul goes, "Yeah, it was, but it was also about something else. Because if you've got a young couple in love walking along down by the river, and the young man says to the young women, 'Darling, I love you so much. I'm going to demonstrate my love to you. I am going to go and jump into that river. I'm going to drown myself for you. I love you so much.' Well, that's weird. Why would you just do that to show your love? Because you're not going to be alive at the end of your little expression of love to keep on loving. That's a stupid thing to do. So God just didn't die for you because he loves you. But what about this? What if, he said to the interviewer, he said, what if that his girlfriend found herself struggling and drowning in the river, and he jumped in and rescued her? But in doing that rescue, he himself drowned. He said, now would not that be love itself? And the good news is, and I want to leave us on some good news, that actually this valley finds all of us in a place of a need of rescuing. And actually, Paul's point is this: none of us are in a place where we can self-justify ourselves. Hitler's here, other people might be here, down here, but I'm up here. I'm all right. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, and we're all in need of a Savior.